In our world of social media and social media algorithms and influencers and SEO titles and all these other things, finding genuine sources of fact-based, legitimate, scientific, and health-related information has become really hard. There is no shortage of voices out there who are spouting any number of things, and it's difficult to ascertain whether or not they're saying the truth. My guest today, Brinleigh Reuter, is trying to change and hopefully better that ecosystem. After years working in the tech industry, Brinleigh launched the Harvard-incubated nonprofit Science to People, whose goal is to provide specifically influencers with verified, fact-based, scientific and health-related information. The means with which Science to People aims to accomplish this mission is kind of rooted and based around generative AI. Now, the application of generative AI as an educational and communication tool is complicated and challenging, and it comes at a complicated and challenging time. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not, welcome back. This is the Deep View Conversations. Brinleigh, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
I want to start with Science to People, and specifically why something like this is necessary, why you sat down and said, you know what, we're going to do this. What are you trying to accomplish? Why is this the moment?
I think coming from tech and moving into academia, I realized that there was a lot of information that was just locked up in these ivory towers that was completely inaccessible for the average human. And I define access like three ways, and we define access three ways at Science to People. It's that information is discoverable, that it's not like locked behind a paywall. Most journal articles, if you wanted to read something that felt relevant to you, even just by the title, is $50 if you're not already associated with a leading institution like Harvard or otherwise that provides you access. Then, that it's understandable. The vast majority of Americans can really only comprehend information about a sixth grade reading level. And even doctor pamphlets are written at a ninth grade reading level, which is accessible, but not entirely for a lot of folks. And then you take in cultural relevance when language is translated and other kind of markers like that. And it's really hard to understand information. And then the third is that it's actionable, right? So when we think about access, it's being able to find it, understand it, and then apply it to your own life. And I just realized that really wasn't like happening in the ways that I was hoping it would as somebody coming from outside of academia. And then I saw as a researcher and as a student at Harvard that there was just a lot of really incredible information and science being produced that could be really accessible across those three markers for folks and just wasn't getting out. Whether it's that the researchers, don't have the science communication kind of ability to translate their own findings into everyday plain language, or that it was really expensive, or it was, being shared at conferences and in conference proceedings. And then just people talk about it at conferences and then do more research on it, and it never really goes anywhere. And this is kind of upsetting to me. I have two small kids. And I thought about the ways that they were going to consume information and get it online, especially when it related to their kind of health and well-being. And I thought about, the vectors of that information, and that right now, in my opinion, are influencers. And so when you think about influencers as an access point, it could be really cool. It could be a really cool way of opening up those three areas of access to the general population. And I learned about a study that was happening at Harvard where they were providing influencers specifically about mental health and specifically from TikTok with evidence-based information and PDF toolkits. And coming from tech, my immediate thought was, that's so cool, but how are you going to scale that, right? You can't keep emailing PDFs to people that are manually produced by like an army of practicum students. And so AI obviously was the solution. And so I accidentally started a nonprofit. Basically, that's how Science to People started.
stumbled into it. I
Yeah.
it's a really interesting problem that we have, and I guess it's very prominent with scientific stuff, especially health stuff. The study that you were mentioning where they're providing mental health pamphlets to influencers.
Mhm.
It does sound really cool because in every health related category imaginable. And it seems like from what I've seen, health is just a really prominent thing in the influencer category. Um, there's a lot of just BS that just gets sprouted, and people trust it. I'm not really sure why, except maybe it looks good. But drink this tea and you'll have the abs that I have or something.
Yeah.
And that's kind of pervasive and it's really dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's even hard. Like I'm just thinking about this PDF sending thing, which is a
Yeah.
great idea to start with, but then like a challenge that I have, right? Looking at fitness influencers, right?
Hmm.
Who do you trust? And what's the marker of determining whether you should trust someone? Because you'll think this one looks good, and then you'll see some other guy criticize that guy because that guy's crazy, and
Yeah.
this kind of circle of just virality.
Yeah.
That information is kind of sold as a means of getting you in, but information is really scarce, and it's such a big problem. And I guess so. Right before we got on, you published a newsletter about applying the kind of disruptive playbook of tech to health communication. I didn't have a chance to read it in depth, but I did want to mention it in the scope of the problem that we're talking about. Uh, you know, that playbook and applying that playbook of the move fast and break things, why that's necessary. I what light bulb I guess went off in your head that you're like, yes, you know, this system is not working.
Yeah. I think that right now, as I've begun to understand more deeply kind of the science communication landscape, um, there's a lot of caution, understandably, in communicating science with the public. Studies that were done on, a subpopulation, or, honestly, mostly like white men historically, um, it's very hard to pull out that information and apply it to like, black women in the southern United States between the ages of, 18 and 45. And so you have to be really careful about like kind of putting findings from one onto other populations. That's the first reason science is careful. And then the second is like correlation causation. We all hear about this all the time, right? And so science communication can kind of get caught up in like this, like we have to be really careful. And so like the level of like approvals and kind of like hand wavy word salad that goes into communicating science prevents us from actually sharing anything useful in real time. And then we see the mistakes of science communication around like the early COVID pandemic, where science was being extremely cautious, but yet also applying what they knew at the time about similar types of viruses. And then when it proved to be perhaps not fully the truth, which is a very complicated term, people freaked out and were like, "You screwed us, right? You lied to us. We've got our kids home. They're not able to go to the playground." I mean, in my town where I lived, um, I saw kids at school once they finally went back to school sitting on the playground with like 6 feet of tape on the ground between them, where they had these like ropes that they were holding on to, and it's just wild. And everybody is like, "We trusted you, science communicators, and you didn't tell us the truth," but they told what they knew at the time, but they didn't frame it as that. And I think it's that we've kind of conflated the necessity of science to share truth when that's not how science works. Like science doesn't find truth. Science finds the information available at the time, and then it iterates. That's like literally the scientific method, right? And so I think that there's a lot about like historic science communication methods that just aren't effective for modern comms and like the way that people want information now, which, as you pointed out, is like right now I need a prescription. And like that's like fit tea, right? Or like
Yep.
whatever, ivermectin, I guess is trending again at the moment. God help us. Um, but I think that there's this method in tech of like launch then iterate that inherently scares science, but I think that it could help if we applied some of those principles to the way that we work in communicating information to the public about health and public health and science topics. And a lot of what I meant in the newsletter that I sprung on you um, is that there's this whole process of funding tech innovation that means that it can move really freaking fast. There's a lot of money thrown at it, and it's like vibes based investing, right? Like you like a founder, I'm investing in that founder. They're a 3-time founder, and we're going to invest in this 3-time founder, and their past three, you know, companies have failed, but they're 3-time founders, so we're going to invest in them. And that just doesn't happen with science. Like we're in the process of a grant. Hopefully, by the time this podcast airs, we'll have received it. But I've been talking to this foundation since September, and it's for pocket change in this tech community, and it will enable us to build an AI pilot program for influencers to be able to communicate science across their platforms in really compelling and engaging ways. And I have been like pushing a refrigerator up the stairs trying to get a little bit of money for this thing. And but it's because science is inherently uncomfortable with big bets, and it needs proofs, right? It needs the scientific method to be able to invest. So like part of my problem is that I've got a tech startup that's a science nonprofit. And so like I'm asking people to take a bet, a small bet on us, but science is inherently uncomfortable, and the types of people that fund science projects aren't used to bets. And so it's a challenging kind of place to work within. Um, but my hunch is that if we got some of those tech vibes into kind of science communication funding and kind of process where we just like test, put like chunks of money towards it, not huge chunks, little chunks towards it, and test. And we have incredible measurement in science, right? Like the Harvard study, like those folks at the Center for Health Communication at Harvard are doing really incredible work in measuring knowledge construction at an audience level by scraping TikTok comments, measuring markers of trust and signals of behavior change at the audience level, at the viewer level. We're collaborating with them. We can borrow those methods and leverage those methods to see if our hunch is onto something. And if it's not, then that's also great. But science is also inherently fearful of null findings. They don't publish them anymore. So it's a tricky system to operate within. But I think that if I can catch the attention of some folks that have tech money and are used to tech investing, but to get interested in helping solve this problem of science communication, we can actually have a much healthier society.
Running a small business means making the most of every second. AI can bring huge benefits, but keeping up with all the new tools can feel overwhelming. That's where Salesforce comes in. Our team has put together a free guide packed with expert tips, real-world success stories, and straightforward playbooks, all tailored for busy owners and agile teams. Grab a cup of coffee, give it a quick read, and start seeing productivity gains by lunchtime. Download your copy now at tdv.co/Salesforce. Again, that's tdv.co/SALESFORCE. Yeah, it's an interesting. Can you get the vibes guys, right?
Yeah.
The Silicon Valley guys to come over east to Boston, right?
Yeah.
So when you stumbled into this tech startup nonprofit science communication entity, was it always rooted from the beginning in we're going to use generative AI as like the kind of foundation of what we're doing, or was the inception more of there's a problem here, I'm looking for a solution?
I think so for science to people, as far as like its founding, it was based on leveraging Gen AI. Like, but the problem is the one that I'm obsessed with. The current, approach to a solution is by leveraging Gen AI. I think that there will be other ways to approach this, but right now, at the size kind of, or the scale and speed that I think we need to operate at to meet the moment, Gen AI is the natural choice. And like the products and like platform that we're developing are not inherently like defensible. It's just that nobody else is doing it because nobody cares, really, in tech at least. Um, and so I think that that's why it's like novel, is that it, tech is not like everybody's like, well, why can't you just use ChatGPT? I'm like, well, can you use a knife to open a can? Sure, but it's messy and it'll probably hurt somebody. So that's why we all have can openers in our kitchen. So if you're a science communicator, you can use ChatGPT to communicate science, but it might be messy and hurt you or somebody else. Or you can use the can opener, which is what we're trying to build.
I really like that analogy. I don't know if you came up with that on the spot, or if you've been using that when you're talking to these vibes investors, but it's good. Um,
Yeah, I actually it's like a 2 week old analogy. So
yeah,
you heard it here first, basically.
awesome. Keep using it.
Thanks.
But it is an interesting idea, right? Why not just use ChatGPT for everything? And I think what we're seeing is that for anything that matters, you can't. These,
I love
these,
that. That's also good.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've been working on that. Um, these generalist models that OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, et cetera, are making, they don't function well for specific domains. And the problem is that if you're not an expert in that domain, it's really hard to discern whether or not they're functioning. And this is a random, unrelated example, but today I just pulled up ChatGPT to see if it could, step in as a real estate agent, find me condos close to New York City, right?
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Certain price range or whatever. So it gives me a list of condos, and it gives like detailed information about all of them. I'm like, interesting. Every link I check, each of the separate links was actually the same link to the same listing, which had nothing to do with any of the information it outputted
Uh-huh.
relevant to the condos that it found. So it it has access to information. It has no understanding of that information. It just outputs it, and it never says no. I don't know, or I wasn't trained on that, or my data
Hmm.
isn't specific enough, or I'm
Hmm.
getting crossed wires because I have data from real estate websites, but I also have all this data from Reddit, and it's fake. And so that's the problem. And so for you, when you went to build Verify, well, I guess tell me first about the construction of Verify. Is it a kind of fine-tuned wrapper around a third-party generalist large language model, or did you say we're going to build our own model here? Is it like
Yeah.
how did that happen?
Well, I have $0 in funding, so we have not built our own model, but we are fine-tuning a language model. And the fine-tuning mechanism is a really extensive database of input-output examples of science communication that we have written with a couple of fellows that we're working with and vetted with experts in science communication from across like our advisory board, which is really robust, and other kind of experts in the field that we're working with. We developed a really comprehensive rubric that each output that we're designing is measured against. And that will all feed into the language model that will be like the Verify language model. And that's the can opener, right? And then on top of that, we'll be able to build a lot of different cool applications. So the first one that we're planning to pilot is for influencers. And believe me, it won't be called Verify when we try to give it to influencers. And we want to give it to them. We don't want to sell it to them. That's why this is a nonprofit. Because I worked at YouTube. I know influencers, they're not going to pay for shit. So if we want them to use it, we have to give it to them. And they're also probably not going to come and use a science communication tool. So we are going to give them a content creation studio. But that's like one application that will be built on top of this like platform of the Verify LM. Um, And then, there's a lot of different applications that you can build from there. And that's just, those are wrappers, those are different, UX, UI designs, different user bases. Some might be for enterprise or for, in some way for revenue for us to remain sustainable, and some will be for free. Um, but I think that as long as you have the really solid foundation of an LM that thinks and speaks like an expert science communicator, you can build a lot of really great applications on top of it for folks, to help make their jobs easier or help make the work easier. Um, but the LM that we're choosing to fine tune on, we're doing a lot of rigorous testing, because I do not think we've tested with a bunch, but I don't think we're going to go with one of the major players because they're built on the knowledge of the world and the internet, and a lot of that is bias and deep misinformation, and it's too much. So we're considering right now we're testing a series of small models. We're looking at an agentic system to match up into the RAG. Like there's a bunch of different stuff, but the meat of it, or the moat, is this proprietary database of science communication output.
And where's that database coming from? Like, where are you sourcing the kind of information that you and your team are verifying this is legitimate, this is not BS?
We're writing it. That's why it's taking so long.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, that's how you make it good, right? That's how you make it trustworthy. Like, we're literally writing it, probably a couple thousand pieces of output data. We are using a rubric that we designed internally to make sure that it meets the criteria that we have identified as high quality science communication. And then we are loading it all into the training. So that's what we're working on right now. And that's why we're paying two people with money that we've raised over the past couple months, mostly like friends and family. We're paying two fellows to work on this with us they're both science communicators, and then myself and the rest of my team are not taking a salary, but we're building it. And then we're hooking it up to a RAG that we are designing ourselves as well. Some of it is using an API to an open access database, and some of it are content licensing partnerships that we have with a couple of major science producers. And that'll ensure that, the information quality output is much higher than it would be if you were just using ChatGPT or otherwise. Even if you built a RAG through a custom GPT or something,
Right.
it'll be a lot higher quality.
That's an enormous project.
Yeah. It's worth it
And
though, don't you think? Like, I think it's worth it.
yeah, I mean, I definitely think we need an approach to make it better. Our current system, I think it's interesting applying different levels of automation at different things, right? The end goal is this kind of studio that you're talking about, where you can have a system that influencers can use to make their stuff that is going to be accurate.
Hmm.
In order to get that, right? Like I think other people, maybe out west in Silicon Valley, would say have a Gen AI model generate the stuff that you're training it on. But I think for reasons that we've already talked about, that doesn't really work. And so it's interesting to apply kind of intellectual human rigor to something that will result in automation.
Yeah, and I think we are leveraging tools at different parts of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Like, one of my team members, one of our founding team, has created a custom GPT that she trained on our rubric, and so she'll spot check output against the rubric using that custom GPT. So, there's definitely ways to build a process into the system that means that we're not just being completely like idiotic with our time, or anybody's time. Uh, but yeah, I mean, science demands rigor. And if we're going to try to sell people the can opener, we need to make sure that what we're selling them is actually going to work. It's actually high quality, is actually going to open the can better than a knife.
Right. And at this point, I mean, your early stages, you're kind of locked down in this project, fine tuning, finding the right model. So at the point where you do deploy, you have a system that you're like, okay, we're done setting up the system, we're done generating that information for it, it's ready. How do you intend on ensuring that that output remains accurate, that hallucinations don't happen, that reliability stays strong throughout deployment?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be the same way anybody, you test it rigorously with the team and you keep trying to break it. You keep throwing it, you know, questions that could throw it off or maybe it's not expecting. What we're hoping to do is test initially and pilot initially, probably with a subset of scientific kind of focus areas. So, like I mentioned, the Harvard study focused specifically on mental health topics. Maybe I think we'll probably pilot this fall, winter. And so, maybe we'll focus specifically on epidemiology or immunology or something like that. So topics that are relevant to the season, flu season, vaccine season, whatever. Maybe that's what we'll pilot with, and use folks to really see how the output is. And then obviously, you have people that are monitoring it and continuing to test it. The RAG will update every 24 hours with any new published information. So anything that's been published academically will be available almost immediately from the broader database that the model is pulling from, which is great. So we'll maintain up to date science. But yeah, I think it'll be just like any AI product. You have to have a really great team of engineers.
This much is true.
Yes.
I'm curious too. So you worked at Google, influencers. You said this a little while ago, and I just wanted to circle back to that. I don't know if you've already started speaking to influencers about this project, but I'm very curious either where some of them are or where you think they are in terms of their interest in doing this right, in actually trying to generate information and output information into their trusted ecosystem that is genuinely accurate. Is there an interest in that?
I think it depends on who we target first, and we kind of a phased go to market. There's a lot of really incredible science communicators online. I don't think they would call themselves influencers, but they're people who communicate science online, or they're like, kind of new journalists, new science journalists, stuff like that. And those folks want this tool real bad because they're spending 6 to 8 hours. That's what they're telling us per post, per content piece on research. And yeah, they can use the existing kind of research AI tools that are out there, but then the colloquialization, the translation piece is so challenging per post. So not only is the research taking them a really long time, but then the translation is taking a really long time. So those people want that, and that's probably who we'll test with first, and who like our main original kind of user base will be, are those, thousands, I would say, of science communicators who are already doing the good work. And then I think our next target audience is like that movable middle, folks that are in the wellness area of the internet that aren't necessarily considering themselves science communicators. So these are folks that maybe are writing, or, like you said, like a fitness person who's talking about like creatine for building muscle, and they're going to like Google shit, and hope that it's true. Instead, they can come to us, and make sure it's true, and have like a really awesome citation, and like have it connected to a trending song for TikTok or something like that, or build infographics and all that cool stuff too. So that's like the movable middle, and then you've got like the disinformation adjacent folks. So misinformation is bad information by accident, and disinformation is for profit or politics. So I think it's really important we use them interchangeably. And like, I think people inherently kind of have this feeling that disinformation is more nefarious, and it is, but like the actual definition is that it's you make money from it or political gain. And so like the disinformation adjacent folks are people that are like the ivermectin manosphere at the moment, Like, I'm not exactly sure at the exact moment, like who's fueling the ivermectin lobby, but like it's working because a lot of people now are talking about ivermectin for cancer. Like Mel Gibson was on Joe Rogan, I think a couple weeks ago, talking about how he had like a, sample size of one who used ivermectin for like advanced cancer and was cured miraculously or something. It was like his friend, which is cool. And science has not ruled it out, but science has also not shown that it's effective. And high doses of ivermectin can be extremely dangerous at the individual level. Like it can kill you. And people are taking it off label and out of prescription. So because of these pieces of like adjacent disinformation. So I think those folks will be an interesting user base for us in that, like, I do believe that they're trying to share information about things that they think the traditional science community doesn't want people to know or isn't like doesn't have the balls to back up yet. And I think that we can help them communicate their points in a more cogent and coherent way, and perhaps in ways that aren't so dangerous at the individual level. So like you can still talk about ivermectin, but like don't say that like my friend took it and survived, so you will too, right? You can say my friend took it and I have a sample size of one, and high doses of ivermectin when taken off, outside of a prescription and overseen by a doctor can kill you. Like there's just a different way of delivering that information. Same with like raw milk or I don't know, botulism from making your own honey or something. So like all of these things are like that disinfo adjacent. And then there's the disinformation crew, which happens with a lot of wellness influencers because it's going to be a $9 trillion industry by 2028, where they're paid by a brand to talk about a product that they really don't know if the information is true or not. And we have product extensions and plans to help them sort through that, to hopefully reduce the amount of like product-based disinformation out there for consumers.
So you've clearly thought this through.
Sorry, that was so long. Oh my God.
No, that was a really. It is all very interesting.
It's a complicated ecosystem.
It is, and I don't think we
Yeah.
think about it like that. It's just, I'm pulling up YouTube.
Yeah. But
What's the algorithm show me,
yeah, and it's what the algorithm shows you, and it's also though who speaks to you. And like we know from research that people are forming deep personal relationships called parasocial relationships with influencers. It's the same deep relationship that a 3-year-old forms with Daniel Tiger or Elmo. It's that idea that they're talking to you, and so you attach to them. And it happens with adults with influencers. There's study after study that shows it, and so that's what these folks are leveraging, rightly or wrongly. And it's a beautiful thing too, because so many people's lives have been changed by communities online for the better, and from influencers online and communicators online. So I think like it's a double-edged sword, just like anything else. But I'm a tech optimist, obviously. I don't want to, burn it down. I just want to make it healthier for everybody.
Right. Well, and also in this case, I don't know how you would go about burning it down.
Yeah, I know. You
I
can't.
don't know where you would stick that match, but even just like mentioning the algorithms, right? So obviously we have these parasocial relationships, which are kind of fascinating to study and kind of watch as that has developed over, the 2010s, I'd say, in terms of the adults developing these relationships with people online.
Mm-hmm.
And they are very intense. And these kinds of fan communities and intense reactions to just about everything.
Mm-hmm.
The role of the platforms in platforming these people, and often in platforming malicious or accidental disinformation or misinformation or these other things, that's an interesting one too. And that's one that is increasingly talked about in the sphere of generative AI for election interference, for example, and misinformation on that side. And should platforms be telling users, hey, this post was generated with AI, hey, like double check the sourcing on this, we don't know if this is real or not, like whatever caveats they could put in place. For something like what you're doing, verifiable scientific communication. I mean, you've talked about a lot of different ways that you can leverage this platform. And I wonder if you think beyond the influencer sphere of maybe there's a simple automated fact checker that YouTube should employ here.
Yeah. Yeah, we're working on that too. Um, yeah, and we're working on a version that you could use as like a consumer and just a person in the world. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of applications, and ideally, like we would plug in to the back end of these platforms, and if we're able to create a strong enough product, um, they can license us and plug it into the back end so everybody can see it. Or instead of using community notes, they can leverage our technology to check information and put a flag on it or something else if they want to. Um, the desire there at the organizational level has to be in place. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of capability for this, but the ability to kind of capture uh, trending mis or disinformation topics from across the internet and then track them, with like in a methodical way, and that's all, that's all what science knows how to do and is getting better at from a tech perspective, and we're investigating those types of capabilities as well.
Lots of applications. And yes, every platform is going to be different. I I wouldn't expect much interest on the X side of things, but the other ones, actually, I have no idea at all. But from where you're coming from, at least, Google, YouTube,
Yeah.
would you think that there is interest in, as we get further into this age of, I mean, even without generative AI, misinformation is a problem.
Hmm.
On the nefarious side, generative AI can really accelerate the scale and scope with which people that are producing misinformation can produce it, make it look realistic, get it out there in more places. I Would you expect that some of these platforms would be interested in exploring methods of reining that in?
Yeah, and to be fair to them, they already are. Like that was, I think, the hardest thing working within tech and hearing a lot of like the haters. Um, there's like really good people that work at these tech companies that really want to do the best things for their billions of users and are trying super hard to build those products and services out day in and day out and make sure that people know that they exist or how to use them. Um, the YouTube team, the YouTube health team under Dr. Garth Graham are doing incredible things with their, health shelves or whatever they're called, with, raising up authoritative health information, really thoughtful partnerships. Obviously, all of the YouTube or the Google Health kind of buckets on the side of whenever you search for something are really valuable to the everyday consumer. That was a huge initiative back when it first launched, and still continues to be a source of authoritative information. I think that there's a lot more some smaller platforms can do, TikTok, Snap, otherwise, about making sure that users that are searching for health related or science related information are raised authoritative information first. It's a bit trickier, but the big guys are doing it well. To your point, Meta X, the appetite there has changed publicly, so it's not new news that their efforts are different than they were a year ago, and their motivation is different than it was a year ago. As a personal user, I'm reconsidering where I spend my time. As But though my advice to science communicators is to stay on those platforms. That's where the people are that you need to talk to. So getting off them in some sort of like institutional huff is not helpful. You just need to learn how to communicate with those people differently. But as an individual, you definitely have the right to decide where you spend your time and, place your data.
I mean, everything that we're talking about is kind of what you said, right? It's communication, but it's communication rooted in education. And I guess that's the challenge for a lot of people. In a slightly different arena, I run into that challenge pretty regularly, reading papers and trying to decipher science that sometimes goes, far beyond my understanding. I try to keep up with neuroscience stuff, and I am no brain scientist, because it relates to AI and my coverage of, if people are talking about AGI and neural networks and stuff,
Hmm.
and we don't really understand much about the brain, I'm going to follow brain research. I think it's fascinating, but also relevant. But
Yeah.
how do you? It's the dual challenge that you mentioned earlier, which is A, how do you understand that, and then B, how do you communicate that to people who, I, it's even harder to make that digestible. And that's the same thing, even with some deep computer science stuff and what is actually going on here. The science is not accessible. And so that's an interesting, it's the education communication bit. And specifically, I did want to talk about the education bit and as generative AI relates to it.
Hmm.
Where we've been seeing these pushes. I guess it started, right? ChatGPT comes out November 2022. And then by 2023, students are using it to write their papers for them. And that hasn't really changed. They might use it in slightly different ways. Maybe they don't copy and paste anymore because they know that they'll be found out. But the kind of the immediate application was the homework helper
Hmm.
slash, help me cheat. Um, However you want to define that.
Yeah.
But then in the wake of that, we've seen massive pushes to integrate very quickly this technology into educational systems. This week, which will be many weeks later by the time this comes out, but as of when we're talking, OpenAI and Anthropic are both, making systems available to college students. And these are the same general purpose systems that we were talking about.
Hmm.
You've got high school boards across the country that are pushing adoption really, really hard. Um, it's interesting, and I think it's challenging. I don't think it's as straightforward as it's being laid out, but I wonder what you think about. I mean, from where you are, there I think clearly is a role for generative AI in education. I wonder what you think the role is and should be as this just keeps kind of going.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. I also work at a research lab that focuses on digital wellness of youth and how technologies and interactive media impact youth well-being and mental health. And so I'm working right now on a translational research project on the impact of generative AI in commercial products for early childhood. Um, my focus at Harvard was in early childhood and informal learning. I have two little kids. I have a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. And so I think a lot about kind of how they're going to grow up with these capabilities in their probably chipped into their arm or something. I was going to say in their phones, but who am I kidding? They're not going to have phones. That's ridiculous. Um, I think that yeah, I went to a conference on AI and education at MIT 2 years ago, year and a half ago, and one of the postdocs presenting was talking about using AI to kind of facilitate the Socratic method as an educational tool or as a tutor for students and the efficacies of that. And now we see that in the new OpenAI tools that they're offering for EDU. Um, and that was fascinating to me to read those launches, those product launches, because it's like, well, yeah, okay, like, and they're like, oh, it's going to like enhance critical thinking, or at least not like completely stifle critical thinking. And I was listening to one of your previous guests talking about the skills that you guys were discussing, the skills atrophy concept. And I think that like as kids are going to grow, as youth are going to grow up with these capabilities, we do have to really think about the AI literacy components and how we enable them to coexist with these tools while maintaining human the value of human cognition. Like, where do we really encourage the use of these tools as tools? And it's the same with giving your kid an iPad. We have iPads for both of our children in my house, and I give a presentation often about this, and I show the picture of my kids on their iPads when I was making that presentation because I use it as a tool. It's not a babysitter. We have babysitters that are humans. But I needed to finish that presentation, so I gave my kids the iPad for an hour so I can whip it out, And I think it's going to be the same with AI in a lot of ways, but I think we are vastly underprepared for the implications on the job market and on future kind of capability at the exact moment. Like, I'm really concerned about what people are going to do in the next 8 years for work, and much less students that are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in education for skills that are going to be completely replicable through AI. So, I think that it's tools based, it's AI literacy, it's telling your toddler. My toddler talks to Google in our house all the time, and I'm like, "Oh, you're talking to the computer. You're talking to a computer." I keep telling him he is talking to a computer. I do not say he, she, Google, Zippy, whatever you want to name it. Like, I refuse to personify these devices and these services. And I think that that's a huge mistake that people are making in educational AI, is personifying the bot.
It's such a challenging environment. And I guess that this probably came out in that episode that you were listening to. I am terrified for the state of what human society will look like in the next generation, just largely because I don't think anyone's prepared to handle the integration that's being forced on them. I think if things were, I think in an ideal world, the educational integration of generative AI would be much more slow, much more cautious. This is an application of science, right? Where it's like kind of test it out, see what happens. I
Uh-huh.
would want to see teachers, and this sucks. I don't want to put more stuff on teachers' plates, but if you're being asked to use generative AI in the classroom, I would want to see you have a very full grasp and understanding of technology, the entire pipeline. What is it? Where does it come from? Why does it work? How does it work? What are the consequences of using it? Both cognitively and otherwise, right? Like if you're going to use ChatGPT as a calculator, it's an outsized amount of carbon emissions than if you just used a calculator. And so there's a scope of things going on here that people don't know about that I would really like them to know about before we start telling them use these things, build the muscle memory around them. And
Mm.
I don't see that happening. And in light of the lack of that happening, I'm very concerned about, as you mentioned, and I've talked about this a lot, skill atrophy in terms of human cognition, specifically among younger people. And I think I think social media has already caused a decent amount of damage here in terms of attention spans and stuff, and just the internet in general. Everything's a double-edged sword.
Mhm.
But here, I worry that if we get into the habit of just kind of pushing off cognitive load to a system that can just do good enough, I don't know what we'll look like as a society in like 15 years. Like maybe the AI systems will be good enough that will be advanced to a certain degree or certain level, but we wouldn't be able to do any of those advancements if the generation that kind of takes over isn't really capable of critical thinking and isn't really capable of, being discerning. And that
Mhm.
makes the whole AI and education sphere just so complicated to me and really, really hard. And I would just advocate for just move slow and understand what you're talking
Mhm.
about. and it's just a tough thing. And then I see specific applications that I'm like, oh wow, this is awesome. Like there's a company called Dissolve who uses generative AI to auto generate games for people with dyslexia, where the system learns what specific areas in your brain are need attention, generates games to simulate those specific areas, and they're actively helping kids overcome dyslexia. Now, that's one of those applications that is generative AI, but it's not use this to write the paper kind of like it's a
Hmm.
very purposeful application that I'm like, I think there's a lot of room on that side of things that is less concerning to me than throw general purpose stuff into a classroom.
Yeah, and look, I totally hear you. I totally hear you. I'm not sure if I really fully agree. And it's because I think that the argument that you're making is more aligned with like abstinence-based sex education. And the argument that I would go for is comprehensive sex education starting in, kindergarten, or at least body education, right? Um, and I think outcomes would show that people do better when they've had comprehensive sex education that's not abstinence based than abstinence based education. And so I worry that by saying, yeah, move slow, pull back, educate deeply all of the teachers, that there's going to be a generation of kids, of youth that have no real experience from a education standpoint and how to leverage these tools for better outcomes. And instead, like we see with abstinence-based education, they're going to be using it anyway, right? They're going to be on character AI and, forming relationships with um, whomever character they choose and, using ChatGPT to write their papers, but they won't be using it in a structured way. So I think that what the education system should be doing, and again, like who's going to fund this? By the way, the Department of Education has just been shut down. So,
Right.
like where's the money coming from to roll out these comprehensive plans? Um, but I think that we need to teach them how to use it, and that's why I do think it's important for them to be using it in school in controlled environments where they learn to put the condom on the banana in front of their friends and laugh and get embarrassed. Like it's it's important to have these kind of shared experiences and practice in safe, controlled environments with trusted adults, so that they can say like, "Hey, this just told me that one of our founding fathers was black. Is that true?" Okay, no. Now let's talk about why AI hallucinates. Let's have a conversation about this. Let's unpack it. Who else wants to test it? Right? So I think that there is value in integrating these into the school system right away, in a lot of different ways. Yes, no, they shouldn't, or no, they should not be using it as a calculator. And there does need to be education around the proper use cases for these tools as they roll out. I think the struggle is that like we just kind of have standardized um, educational benchmarks now in the US. Like, how are we going to roll out comprehensive, curriculum wide, subject matter specific AI literacy opportunities? Because we barely even have digital literacy or media literacy in schools. Um, and then there's the huge backlash against tech in schools, or smartphones in schools at least. And, that's something that we have to contend with as well. So I think like I hear you completely. But my theory is like if it's not happening in schools, it's still happening, just with less rigor and structure behind it. And I do agree that teachers, everybody needs to know more about AI. I think parents need to know a lot more about AI. We had an opportunity. There was a study that came out from FOSI, the Family Online Safety Institute, November 2023. They had to start running their survey like January 2023. So right after ChatGPT came out, they jumped on it. And it was like the first time we'd ever seen with the technology that parents and their children, they did a parent and kid dyad study. Parents and kids knew the exact same amount about AI at that period of time. And I remember sitting at the conference, like my leg kind of nervously shaking, being like, okay, we've got like T minus 2 months to jump on this. I don't think anybody's done a great job of educating parents. So I don't know if it's like a who's on first issue or like what, or like who's in charge of this, but like somebody needs to be. And like I would raise our hand at Science to People, but like I'm kind of busy. So like I don't know. I don't know who's in charge of this, but I'm equally concerned, but I also don't want to stick our head in the sand and say, don't use it at all, because I think there's danger in that. So I don't know. But there's money going into it from a research perspective. I think part of the problem is that that research then is not getting out fast enough to be able to turn into translation and application from an industry perspective. And I think there's money going into it in the tech side, a lot more money than's going into the research side to build the products and commoditize them. And they're kind of like, don't look at us, look over there, right? Get it out, get it out, get it out. And then there's some people in the middle doing thoughtful work. Khan Academy, I think, is doing a good job, especially with kids stuff. I know Sesame Workshop and PBS are thinking about it from an early learning perspective in a pretty thoughtful way. There's researchers that they're partnering with who I absolutely am obsessed with that are doing really good work in this area. And it's freaking scary.
Yeah, I guess on that we'll agree to not completely agree on that one. I don't disagree with you. I just think it's a challenging thing, and but also at the end of the day, it's almost like an argument over nothing, because it doesn't really, like there's like you said, and I think this is the larger point. No one's taking ownership over disseminating education around these systems. That's just the simple fact of the matter.
Yeah.
Schools aren't doing it. School boards are not doing due diligence. They're not informing parents. On the tech side, on the Silicon Valley side, you're, like you said, you're seeing a huge push for productization, and less on education and research. Education to them is a user base, which is going to impact how they are approaching how they want education to use them, because they just want more users.
Yeah.
And so in that environment, yeah, no one's taking ownership over education on AI literacy, and I'm not really sure where that at this point could come from, except we go back to kind of where we started with the whole problem with health communication, science communication, which is people have to find places and sources of information that they trust, and then they somehow have to come up with a way of verifying that that source is a trustworthy source. And I guess, unfortunately, this is going to be one of those things where it has to just come down on the individual, on the parents, and just across the pipeline to inform themselves rather than be informed, which I guess is just where we are. But a challenging environment, I think.
Yeah. It is a challenging environment. It's complicated. It's not getting enough attention. It's getting too much attention. Um, just kind of pick a problem, I think. But there are smart, caring people working on it. And as long as they don't produce another white paper, I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, well, we will see. We will see what happens. But thank you so much for joining me, for your time. This was super interesting.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.